What's up guys, welcome to another coding video where we're going to be working on our dynamic RPG character sheet. Today we're going to cover how to populate your skill values using your ability modifiers and your proficiency bonus. If you missed that video on how to generate your ability modifiers, I will link it right here. Before we hop into it, I wanted to share with you the work in progress version of the Mobile Suit Gundam RPG character sheet that I've been working on. This is what we are working towards in this tutorial series, and it's got a lot of the same features. Obviously down here you can see the ability scores, and they are dynamic like the ones we've been working on, but you see that also when I change the ability scores it starts populating our skill values, and these little checkboxes will apply our proficiency bonus to said values. Same thing with the character level. You know, as you increase your character level, your proficiency bonus goes up and bonus applied to the skills goes up. So everything is tied in together, and of course you get these neat little features like hover effects. You can apply damage, you have your recovery, short rest, long rest, those good things. And you know, there's some other features like the mobile suit. That's probably not going to be applicable to the character sheet that we're working on, but it's just to show you everything that's possible in this particular format. Now, the most important thing that I love about this character sheet, and it's going to be applicable to the one that we're working on in this tutorial series as well, is that because we are formatting it in Bootstrap, it is fully responsive. So this is what the character sheet would look like on an iPad. Obviously still super functional. You've got, you know, everything's clear and legible. You know, we can go in here and take a look at what it would look like on a mobile phone, and it's still fairly usable. And that's something that you don't get with a PDF. Now, someone mentioned in the comments of the last video that it would be nice to see the values populate in a properly formatted character sheet like the one we're looking at here. This was created a couple of years ago. I found it on Reddit, and there are a couple of things that I like about this character sheet and a couple of things that I don't. Obviously, it is gorgeously formatted. It looks just like your, you know, D&D 5e character sheet, and someone actually went to the trouble of making the ability modifiers dynamic, so you can see that the modifier changes when you update the value. Unfortunately, these inputs are not number typed, so you can't just click up and down on them, but you know, it's functional. It does not populate the skills and everything, however. This was very much a work in progress when it was abandoned. Some things that I don't like about it, however, are that it was written out using HTML and CSS preprocessors like Sass. So because it's not written in vanilla CSS and vanilla HTML, it's a little bit harder to work with in terms of making it into a dynamic sheet. So that's unfortunate. The other thing about it is that because it's formatted specifically for D&D 5e, it would be tricky to adapt this for other RPG systems, you know, that are not based on the D20 system. And of course, the big glaring weakness of this character sheet is that it is not responsive. So this is what it would look like on a mobile phone, and it does not scale down, it doesn't stack. I mean, it's still technically usable if you wanted to do it like this, but it's not much better than just having a PDF open on your phone. And so it kind of defeats the purpose of writing everything out in HTML and CSS if it's not responsive. I know that a lot of my players would rather have their character sheet, if they are going to use a digital character sheet, would rather have it accessible on both mobile phones and tablets, like D&D Beyond provides. And for those reasons, I think that this character sheet, as gorgeous as it is probably not as useful as the one that we're making in Bootstrap. Now, if you are interested in seeing the values from our character sheet populate onto this one instead of the Bootstrap enabled one, let me know in the comments below and we can work on that. I can reverse engineer it and strip out all of the preprocessors so that it is vanilla CSS and HTML, and then we can talk about making it into a responsive format. Okay, and now let's hop back into it. This is where we left off in the previous video, where we've got our ability scores, our modifiers, everything is dynamic. We can set up the player level and proficiency bonus, and that changes. So let's go ahead and add our skill table. I'm going to go ahead and format it so that the skills are underneath our proficiency bonus. You don't have to do it this way. This is just the way that it's laid out on the D&D 5e character sheet, and so that's the way I'm inclined to go ahead and set it up. So what we're going to do first is insert a couple of line breaks, that's that BR tag, before we add in a heading. We'll do another H2 tag here, and we'll call it skills. Easy enough, right? Inside that heading, we're going to create our table, and we're going to make it a class of table. That's going to apply the same formatting that we have over here on our abilities table to the skills table as well. Now, this table is not going to need a heading row the way that our ability score table needed one, because I mean really the skills are going to be self-explanatory. So we are going to use rows, but we're not going to use that heading tag that we used in the previous video. Now what we are going to do is in this first cell of the table, that's that TD tag there, we're going to create our first input, and it is going to be of type checkbox. This is one that we haven't used before, but as you can see, it generates this little checkbox for us. And we're going to set the ID of that checkbox to, now if we're using the D&D 5e skill set, the first alphabetical skill is going to be acrobatics, so we're going to say it's acro prof. We're abbreviating acrobatics to acro, and proficiency. So that checkbox is going to represent our proficiency in the acrobatics skill. Now, in the next cell of that table, we're going to name our skill. So it's going to be acrobatics, add a little hole in there, and that's going to indicate what skill we are proficient in. And in the final cell of that table, we're going to create another input. This one is going to be of type number. And we are going to give it an ID of acro score. And that's going to represent our total score of adding the dexterity and the proficiency bonus, if proficiency bonus is applied. Now, if you've been following this tutorial series, you'll find that your acrobatics checkbox no longer checks. The reason that is our little table fix here that changed the width of the inputs within tables to 100% is disabling the ability to check that off. So now what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to edit that CSS a bit. We're going to add some brackets here and set the input type to just numbers. And what you'll find is that that is going to set all of your number type inputs to 100% when they are in tables, but everything else is going to be left alone. And now your checkbox works fine. Now before we get into our JavaScript, we're going to want to copy that entire row and paste in another version of it for each skill that we are going to need to address. And we're going to change the values out for each one. So next in D&D 5e would be animal handling. And we'll go ahead and anim prof, anim score. Let's go ahead and put a G on that. And we'll go ahead and do that for each skill. Got all of our skills laid out here, and all of them are populating correctly in our sheet. Now let's go ahead and create our new JavaScript function. We're going to call it function setSkills. Remember to add your empty parentheses and your brackets. And let's go ahead and add setSkills to our player level change function so that when we change the player level, we'll also set skills. Okay, now the first thing we're going to do in our setSkills function is set up a few variables. So var prof bonus, and we're going to set that equal to, we're going to use that same built-in JavaScript function that we used last time, the parse integer, and we're going to go ahead and wrap up the getter that we're going to use. And this is going to get real old real fast for you guys. So it's going to go document get element by ID. You should probably already know where we're going by this one. And we're going to get our prof bonus value, so dot value, and wrap it up with a semicolon. Now I mentioned before that I'm going to be using a lot of local variables, meaning that variables that can only be accessed in the function that they're being called. The reason I'm doing this, even though it's not necessarily best practices, is that I'm lazy and I'm worried about if I misname a variable and I'm using global variables, I might overwrite something or break something and make it so that it doesn't work. So even though this is not necessarily best practices, it's going to make sure that all of our functions are independent of one another, and you can't mess something up in the proficiency bonus function that's going to ruin everything in your skills and your player level change. It's just making sure that everything has its own variables to work with, and we're not using global variables that might break the entire character sheet. So now let's go on and create variables for each of our ability modifiers. So we're going to say the same thing, var strMod. We're going to get the integer value using that function that we mentioned before. Document dot get element by ID. Go ahead and add our parentheses, our quotes, strMod dot value. And let's go ahead and repeat this for all of our ability modifiers. Alright, now that all of that's done, we can start populating our skills. Now, similar to how we had to use an if statement in order to determine the player level before we generated the proficiency bonus, we're going to have to use an if statement here as well to determine whether or not the proficiency in that skill is checked. So let's go ahead and create our if statement, if parentheses, and we're going to use our favorite getter, which is document dot get element by ID, parentheses and quotes, and we're going to be looking for that checkbox, so the acro prof checkbox, and we're trying to check if it is checked. So we're going to add that dot checked, and remember, when you're checking if something is true, you're going to use two equal signs, not a single equal sign. And if it is true, add our brackets, and we are going to execute this line of code, which is document get element by ID, going to set our acro score value equal to the dexmod variable plus the proficiency bonus variable. Semicolon to wrap it up. And then we're going to go to the end of our brackets here and add an else. So if that checkbox is not checked, let's just go ahead and copy that line of code that we've got and paste it in here. because the only difference is we're not going to add the proficiency bonus. So we'll just say that the acro score is equal to dex mod. Save that up. Now remember, when we check this box, nothing is going to happen because we're not calling that particular function yet. So let's check the box and then change the player level. We've got our proficiency bonus plus our dex modifier, which is currently 0, but if you increase your dex modifier and then change your player level, you see that the function is applied. So now we're just going to copy that if statement for each skill and swap out the acro part of those getters for the individual skill IDs that we put over in our HTML. Well, let's go ahead and do all of that. Alright, now that we have got every skill covered, eagle-eyed and eagle-eared viewers might notice a problem, is that we used the dex modifier for every single skill, and that's not how it works. So we actually need to go in and adjust the modifier that we call for each individual skill to make sure that we're calling the correct modifier that applies to that skill. So let's go ahead and fix that now. It is as easy as swapping out the first 3 letters of our variables because that's how we set it up. There we go. Now we've corrected the ability modifier that gets called for each individual skill, which was super easy because of the way that we named our variables at the beginning. And that is it for our set skills function. That's all that it takes. And what we're going to do is we're going to actually come into our update modifiers function, and we're going to call the set skills function at the end of when we update our modifiers. And what that's going to do is every time we update a modifier, you see that it updates our skills automatically. Okay, it was at this point, unfortunately, that my computer's screen capture stopped recording and didn't get the footage of me making the following changes, but I wanted to walk you through the final steps that we have to take in order to get our function executing properly. So one of the things that we want to do is we want to call the set skills function every time you mark that you are proficient in a particular skill. And how we're going to do that is the same that we've been calling all of our previous functions. We're just going to hop over here into our HTML, and on the input checkboxes, we're going to add this little bit of code right here. OnChange equals, in quotes, set skills with the parentheses and the semicolon. And all that does is whenever you change the value of the checkboxes, it's going to call that function. Now, if you just do that, unfortunately, you're going to find that the function does not get called, or more correctly, you're not seeing the values populating. The reason that that is because before, we used to have placeholder values in our modifier tabs. So to show you what that looks like, we're going to take the value of our strength modifier away and replace it with the placeholder. And then if we go down to athletics, which is a skill that's based on strength, you get a null value. And why is that? Because we don't have a default value in the modifier. Now, if you were to increase your strength score, you see that it starts populating again. So what we did is we have to go through, and in each of our ability modifiers, we're going to replace those placeholders that we had from the last video with value, and it's going to set the default values equal to 0. And that's not a big deal because it just means that everything that's based on 0 is going to show 0. But it's not going to ruin your calculations for once you actually apply ability scores. So those were the last two changes that we have to make before we save everything up, and we're good to go. So that's it. With 4 little JavaScript functions, you can generate your ability modifiers, your proficiency bonus, and your skill values. In the next video, we're going to cover how to do armor class based on your dexterity modifier, your proficiency bonus, and what type of armor you have equipped. If you have any questions or you have suggestions for features that you'd like to see in the character sheet, please leave them down in the comments below. If you're liking the series so far, please consider liking this video and subscribing to my channel for all sorts of Gundam and role-playing game related content. Thank you guys so much for watching. I will catch you later.